afternoon. It's Tuesday, February 21st. I'm Laura Cornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting live from Jerusalem. Tensions ran high today outside the Kiryat military court, which sentenced IDF Sergeant Elor Azaria to 18 months in jail for fatally shooting an incapacitated Palestinian terrorist in Hebron in March last year. In addition, Azaria was given a one-year suspended sentence and was demoted to the rank of private. Today's ruling culminates one of the most controversial court cases in the country's history, with the trial creating social divisions within the ranks of the army and society in general. Explaining the sentencing, military judge Colonel Maya Heller said the court had taken into account the period Azaria has already served in open custody, as well as his good behavior. She added the court also took into account the complexity of the incident in Hebron last March, when terrorists sought to attack soldiers and succeeded in wounding one soldier. She noted it was the first real operational mission Azaria was confronted with, requiring him to treat a wounded comrade. While the atmosphere at the time was complex and tense, Heller also harshly criticized Azaria's commanders and their handling of the incident. She added that the court views Azaria's behavior as a one-time failure. Eyal Basser-Glick, one of the soldiers' lawyers, asked the court to delay Azaria's entry into prison by at least 15 days until after they appeal the sentencing, saying a key witness in the trial has since reneged on his testimony. He described their chances of an appeal as good. However, prosecutors opposed the delay and asked that Azaria begin serving his sentence next Sunday. In the end, Heller agreed to delay Azaria's entry into prison, saying he will begin serving his sentence on March 5th in the military prison 6. As the sentencing was being read, hundreds of protesters gathered outside the courtroom to show their support for the convicted soldier. Dozens of IDF officers were deployed to control the crowd, fearing that clashes would erupt, like the day when Azaria was convicted of manslaughter charges. Extreme right-wing protesters from the Lehava organization shouted violent slogans at police, including "We are the law here," but overall the protest was conducted in an orderly manner. Beitar Jerusalem soccer fans were also among the crowd, which included members of the criminal La Familia group affiliated with the soccer team. Supporters repeatedly said they would do all they can to see that Elor Azaria won't spend a day in jail. The demonstration was also attended by singer Ariel Zilber, who came to entertain the crowd with a song he specifically wrote for Azaria called "Raise Your Head Up High and Don't Be Afraid." In his song, Zilber came out in support for the soldiers' conduct, calling Azaria the nation's hero, saying that his trial is everyone's trial, and anyone who has a bit of sense should know he did the right thing. The sentencing handed down to Elor Azaria created a swift political backlash, with government ministers calling for clemency and other lawmakers criticizing politicians for their cheap populism, saying they are threatening the values of the army and the ability of commanders to carry out their duty. Among the government ministers, Yoav Gallant, Miri Regev, Naftali Bennett, and Yisrael Katz all called on Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman and Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot to grant the soldier an immediate pardon and allow Azaria to return home. Bennett called the legal procedure tainted and said the entire country will pay a heavy price if the soldier is allowed to sit in jail. MK Zahava Galon, head of Meretz, accused the lawmakers of contempt of court. Yesh Atid MK Ofer Shelach said while no one is happy to see a soldier go to prison, an immediate pardon would make a mockery of the system and laws of the army. Likud Party MK Yehuda Glick was one of the only lawmakers to praise the military legal system for what he called its balanced sentence. Writing on his Facebook page, Defense Minister Lieberman called on all sides to respect the court's decision, saying, as in the past, while he may not like the sentencing, it must be respected and upheld. Here to discuss the Azaria sentencing is Lior Stelzer, a military law expert who himself is a former Army prosecutor and defense attorney. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
First of all, Lior, what is your reaction to the ruling?
Well, first of all, what has to be said is the basic thing that this result is quite moderate and quite easy, especially relatively to the harsh determinations of the court in the decision of the guilt. and relatively to the severeness of the felony, of the manslaughter. So it's quite moderate, and I believe that even the defense is quite happy with this result. Again, relatively to all that I stated. In my opinion, it's a good solution to a very sticky situation this case has brought everyone into. And I believe the court has made a very good decision by saying on the one hand that this is a felony, this is not the conduct that we expect from a soldier, and on the other hand, he does take in consideration all the special circumstances that were in this case, and I believe it's a good call. And even after the appeal, if this decision will remain, it's really the less severe decision that could have been made, and for the defendant, it's quite good.
Attorney Stelzer, as you mentioned, this is quite a lenient punishment. Are we likely to see an appeal?
Most definitely we're going to see an appeal. First of all, because it's quite of a win-win situation for the defense. They don't have nothing to lose by making an appeal. And in addition, an appeal, it's a very basic and fundamental right for a defendant that his main line of defense has collapsed and denied by the court. And so making an appeal in this case is not only an option, I think it's obligatory for the defense, and we're most definitely going to see an appeal because there's nothing to lose. They will appeal in the next 2 weeks. They will ask from the Court of Appeal to delay the start of serving the sentence, and after all the appeal proceedings that will take about 3 or 4 months, I believe, the final result will be determined by the Court of Appeals, and that will be the end of the story, I believe. Only after that they could address the pardon and procedures like this.
Throughout the trial, Azaria didn't express any remorse. He insisted that he acted in accordance with the rules of engagement. If perhaps he had shown some sort of regret, do you think this would have affected his sentencing?
I believe so, but considering that he already, as I said, got a quite moderate sentence, I'm not sure how practically it would have been make an affection. But it would definitely be seen different if he would regret and say retrospectively he sees now why he made a mistake, and not claiming all the time that his action was justified. It would have been examined differently by the court, and maybe the punish was even lighter.
How do you estimate that this case will affect future conduct of soldiers who may find themselves in a similar situation?
Well, similar events took place before this trial, and they will unfortunately take place after the trial. I don't believe it has an affection on the soldiers in the field, and I don't believe it has any affection on the legal system, except maybe they will learn from their mistakes, their tactical mistakes and their media mistakes along the way, but their professional decisions will remain the same. I don't believe that there will be any effect by this case in the long term.
One last quick question. Do you think that in their ruling the judges took into consideration the public fallout of this case and perhaps its implications on society, which has been completely divided on this issue?
I believe so. I think we can see between the lines in the verdict that they took into considerations all the really exception public way that this trial was being conducted, and I think the punishment and the sentence is a little bit lighter than in the regular situation. If this case was in a vacuum, if this case was clean, I believe the sentence could have been more harsh, and it's okay. I think it's appropriate that they took it into consideration because this case was exceptional in any way you can imagine, and it has to be taken into consideration.
Attorney Lior Stelzer, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge this evening.
Thank you very much.
In other news, the wave of anti-Semitic attacks that has swept across the United States in recent weeks reached an all-time high yesterday, with at least 11 community centers in areas such as Birmingham, Cleveland, Chicago, Tampa, Houston, Milwaukee, and Nashville receiving bomb threats. At the Chesed Shalamet Jewish Cemetery in Missouri, more than 100 headstones were desecrated. Aerial shots of the cemetery showed rows of graves where headstones had been knocked off and in some instances broken from their bases. Responding to the upsurge in hatred, White House Deputy Press Secretary Lindsey Walters declared hatred and hate-motivated violence of any kind has no place in a country founded on the promise of individual freedom. She said President Trump has already made it clear that such actions are unacceptable. Meanwhile, as word spread throughout the Missouri community, concerned family members flocked to the cemetery.
Horrifying. You know, there's so much anti-Semitism now with all the cabinet members, you know, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but you can't put bigots and people with so much hatred in a cabinet and not have them think it's okay to hate everybody.
I lived in Israel for a very long time, and when something like this happens, typically you go and you drive by and you look to see that everything is okay. And you want to just go and look and see how everything is. So this is one of the things that I would go and do.
Earlier, IBA's Sam Sokol spoke with visiting delegates of the annual Conference of Presidents about the recent upsurge in anti-Semitic attacks in the United States.
We're very concerned with the rise of anti-Semitism, and we would hope that the government would speak out more forcefully from the top level, from the president. Certainly the FBI has been working actively on this, actively to try and find the perpetrators of all of the 69 bomb threats to the JCCs. It's not at a conclusion, but we need continued effort by the administration, and to help eliminate it, I think we need the president to speak out against it.
President Trump and Steve Bannon, his top aide, are very sensitive and upset that so many Jews have blamed them for being anti-Semitic, falsely blamed them, and for causing this apparent rise in anti-Semitism. So they're so sensitive to it. That's why he didn't respond normally, as he should have, to this journalist, because all he heard was that he was also going to blame him for the increased anti-Semitism. Nonetheless, President Trump at this point should publicly, explicitly, and clearly condemn these anti-Semitic acts, say they're a disgrace, and say that we're making it clear to law enforcement officials to do everything they can to catch the people who are making these phone calls and making these anti-Semitic acts, and that we will never rest until we stop this scourge.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu received a warm welcome from members of Singapore's 2,500-strong Jewish community when he arrived at the Magen Avot synagogue yesterday. Children waving Israeli and Singapore flags sang Havenu Shalom Aleichem as the Prime Minister entered. Speaking to members of the congregation, Netanyahu said the Jewish community in Singapore, which dates back some 2 centuries and has its origins of Jews who came from Baghdad, serves as a human bridge between Singapore and Israel.
I believe that Israel and Singapore are kindred spirits. We're small nations that have become, in many areas, global powers. And I believe that our cooperation makes us even more successful.
We've been taught to live with one another. We're very happy with one another. We respect each other's religion.
We had a community of about 3,000 at that time, but many have gone away to Israel, to England.
Prime Minister Netanyahu will arrive in Sydney, Australia tomorrow morning, the first ever visit of an Israeli Prime Minister. Rejecting Palestinian statehood does not necessarily mean applying Israeli sovereignty over the entire West Bank, Education Minister Naftali Bennett told delegates attending the annual Conference of Presidents in Jerusalem yesterday. The Education Minister emphasized that he has no desire to rule over 2 million Palestinians. When asked to comment on the plight of the 42 families evacuated from Amona, Bennett said he believes that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will honor his commitment to the families and authorize the construction of a new town.
Regarding Amona, Prime Minister Netanyahu clearly promised the Amona residents that he would form a new town for them immediately. I'm quoting his words. Moreover, he signed an agreement with them. I am confident that Prime Minister Netanyahu will meet his words, and we will stand beside him while him doing that.
Knesset members overnight voted in favor of the controversial V15 bill that calls to restrict donations to non-governmental organizations advancing political initiatives during elections. In the marathon session, 37 MKs voted in favor of the bill's first reading and 26 opposed. The legislation is aimed at preventing NGOs from bypassing election funding laws and interfering or influencing the outcome of an election through a political organization. The bill calls to impose a limit of 11,000 shekels per single donor and requires organizations to reveal details of their activities and financing to the state ombudsman. The state comptroller must be informed of donations higher than 100,000 shekels. The proposed bill was inspired by the V15 organization that campaigned against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu prior to the former elections. U.S. President Donald Trump appointed Lieutenant General Herbert Raymond McMaster to be his new national security advisor. Retired Army General Keith Kellogg was appointed as Chief of Staff of the National Security Council. McMaster, a highly regarded military tactician, replaces Michael Flynn, who resigned earlier this month amid reports that he had misled Vice President Mike Pence about speaking to Russia's ambassador on U.S. sanction before Trump's inauguration.
So I just wanted to announce, we've been working all weekend, very diligently, very hard, that General H.R. McMaster will become the National Security Advisor. He's a man of tremendous talent and tremendous experience. I watched and read a lot over the last 2 days. He is highly respected by everybody in the military, and we're very honored to have him. He also has known for a long time General Keith Kellogg, who I also have gotten to know, and he's a terrific man, and they're going to be working together. And Keith is going to be Chief of Staff, and I think that combination is something very, very special.
Speaking in Tehran at the 6th International Conference in support of Palestine this morning, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei called Israel a fake nation and a dirty chapter of history that, with the grace of God, will be closed. He also accused the Jewish state of destabilizing the entire region and expressed support for a holy intifada to eradicate the cancerous tumor Israel. Protecting the Palestinian identity is a necessity and a holy jihad, he declared, adding, as long as Palestine and its resistance are preserved, it will be impossible for Israel to strengthen its foundations. In his first public appearance since being appointed, Yahya Sinwar, the newly elected Hamas chief in Gaza, vowed Hamas will continue to defend the Palestinian people. In a meeting yesterday with outgoing Hamas Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh, the two discussed the transition of power. Yahya vowed that Hamas in Palestine and abroad will continue to safeguard the rights of the Palestinian people and will remain committed to resistance in order to achieve freedom. 55-year-old Sinwar, who served a 22-year-long sentence in Israel for his involvement in terror, was among 1,000 Palestinians released in the October 2011 prisoner swap for soldier Gilad Shalit. Since his return to Gaza, he has invested much of his time in acquiring political power and rebuilding the terrorist organization's arsenal. Taking a sharp turn now, a bit of culture, and the 4th Red Sea Flamenco Festival kicks off this Thursday in the southern resort city of Eilat. Dozens of artists from Israel and Spain will be heading down south for the dancing extravaganza, which runs 3 days through Saturday. Performances, workshops, and flamenco parties are all on the bill. Adar Miron, a dancer and the driving force behind the event, promises a weekend of unforgettable fun with some of the finest dancers, musicians, and singers on stage. Among the attractions, guitar playing and poetry workshops, and of course, flamenco dancing. In local money matters, shares were mixed on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, while the shekel was mixed in foreign currency trading. Here are the numbers. And IBA's weather team says temperatures will remain the same tomorrow. Skies will be partly cloudy, and there are chances of isolated showers and thunderstorms, mainly in the south in the afternoon. Here are the highs and lows at home and abroad. And that's all for this newscast. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time, same channel. Until then, I'm Laura Cornfield, wishing you a good evening and shalom from Jerusalem.